Yeah. So, hello everyone. We're live now with Akshay BD here. Akshay was one of the founding members of the Uber India team, and then he worked in San Francisco, worked in Latin America. He's done a bunch of cool stuff with Uber Elevate, which was the flying taxi project they had, and also Uber Eats in Latin America. And now, one of the main ideas Akshay is exploring is the new direction food tech is going to take around the world with mobile and everything so pervasive in Asia. This is one of the first industries that's going to be totally disrupted after, according to Akshay, retail. So, in the next hour or so, Akshay is going to talk about what he thinks are going to happen in the next 10 years and what are the open opportunities to build in the food tech space. Akshay, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Neil. It's good to be here. I think I'm not going to take an hour. It'll probably be shorter. I think these things are fun when you're able to communicate one unifying idea and then maybe a few tactical ideas on what to build or what one could build in the space. I can share my screen real quick. I have a very short presentation, and then that should put us in a spot to start. All right. So the question I asked myself was super simple. Can you just give me 1 second? Sorry about that. Sorry, folks. Hopefully you can see. Does it work right now? I don't know if it's working. Neil, is there a way you can jump back in and tell me if it's working?
Yeah, it's working now.
Okay, great. All right. So I basically quit Uber about 2 years ago. I've been consulting with different kinds of companies, some gaming, some fintech. Actually a couple of them in India as well, right? Like Cred and MPL and these. But what really caught my attention after a bunch of consulting across the board on industry agnostic companies was where food was going, right? Now, given my background, I come from this company that married bits and atoms together. It wasn't like Facebook or Google where there was advertising and everything was you're dealing with your screen. This is you're dealing with real people in real cars and real cities. And so the theme at Uber was always, whether it's Uber Eats, whether Uber Elevate or Uber ride sharing, was marrying bits and atoms together, right? Using bits to control atoms, so using software to control hardware. And so along that theme came the idea of cloud kitchens, for example, right? Which is how do you can you what should restaurants look like in a world where everyone's ordering from their phone? Fast forward to March of this year, COVID happens and it accelerates about 5 years of progress in that and pulls it forward, right? So the question I asked myself was like, what is next for restaurants? And that's what I've been mostly writing about and being involved in, whether on the investment side or just on the consulting side for the last year or so. Um, yeah, so one takeaway that I want you to have at the end of this presentation is simple, right? Which is I think that the next 10 years of food will look like the last 10 years of retail. So it's super simple. All the things we saw happening in retail, which was you took the storefront of a retail shop and abstracted it away into a mobile screen, whether it was a Shopify store or an Amazon or the Amazon app, the storefront migrated from a physical place to a digital place, right? Similarly, with the advent of delivery apps and and kind of this explosive growth of food delivery, especially in a world where the people are going out less, so there's social distancing norms that allow restaurants to remain open but at really unprofitable rates and things like this. It's pretty clear that efficiency in how you launch a restaurant will be important for the next few years, right? Guess what? The same thing happened to retail. There was no COVID, but there was Amazon, right? Where the brick and mortar stores got out competed by stores that were able to go direct to consumer, such as Bobby Parker, Casper, etc., by arbitraging this advertising price. on Facebook, Instagram, etc. So I think the same thing is going to happen with food, right? There's no real difference, and we'll go through why that is. What's the problem now? It's pretty clear, right? You have people eating at a restaurant, but also that it's not optimized for delivery. Like, look at that line of drivers standing waiting to pick up their order inside the restaurant, right? So this is obviously not optimal. Then you have situations like this where people have multiple tablets, one for each delivery player, and they're trying to manage their entire front desk with all of this gadgetry that is unnecessary, right? um, so the way to solve this is to build a restaurant that is exclusively built for delivery. Now what would that look like, right? If the retail parallel, by the way, is Amazon building fulfillment warehouses. So they don't have a storefront, but they have somewhat of a, a hyper local uh, spot in every city where the goods that people order are stored and housed. This is a little bit different, but conceptually it's the same for food, where you end up with a kitchen, right? All you need if you're delivering is a kitchen, is a fully functional, high quality kitchen where you can make your food, where you can rent it out, just like AWS, right? Um, and you can make the food and you can get it, and then you can deliver. So this is what cloud kitchens are, right? They're basically whether it's Rebel Foods or whether it's Cloud Kitchens, the company in the US, or whether it's any number of the Talabat or any number of these uh, cloud kitchen startups that are starting up, are building physical infrastructure that are exclusively meant to plug into the digital infrastructure for delivery, right? So what happens? Well, you look at some smart city kitchens is a startup in Singapore that does this. So here are the differences in the cost and time, right? You typically spend anywhere between 300 to half a million dollars in Sing dollars in starting a new location. You've got to find the correct real estate where there's high footfall. You've got to hire a staff. You've got to get all the permits and licenses to get it open, which often takes about 6 months. You've also got to absorb the cost and risk of starting a new restaurant without knowing whether your restaurant concept would even work. Now you transport that into a kitchen facility. You can open one for as little as $10,000 to $30,000. In a matter of weeks, you can try out your concept and um, and basically launch a full-fledged restaurant if you're interested, or continue expanding in delivery. Now this is exactly what happened in retail, right? There are people who launched products like mattresses, pillows, whatever they did, all these DTC products that came about, watches, etc. They were all super easy to launch because for $30 you can purchase a storefront from Shopify and then launch your own store, right? And I think that that is about to happen to restaurants. We're going into a world where you will log into a portal, sitting in Bangalore, and you'll say, I want to launch a restaurant. It'll say, cool, where do you want to go? You say, I want to launch a restaurant in New York. Okay, which neighborhood? Manhattan. And then it shows you a bunch of, the bunch of kitchens around there and what they're cooking, right? And so you can literally go check, 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 build a menu of 6 items. Then you can, on the next page, you design the menu, right? And then you click launch, it automatically launches that onto all the delivery platforms, Postmates, Uber Eats, Deliveroo, DoorDash, all the ones that you can think of, and your restaurant is live, right? All you have to do then is bring customers to the restaurant by doing digital marketing and whatever other ways you intend to generate foot traffic. That's unique and interesting, right? And there are other efficiencies that these buildings leverage. In each building, you have about 25 to 30 kitchens where people are cooking, whether they're usually mom and pop restaurants, right, or first-time food entrepreneurs. And then you have common areas like this where there are people. There's common storage areas where you can keep all your cold storage, hot storage, all the stuff you need, and that way you're efficiently utilizing space, right? So if you look at the traditional retailer, you went from manufacturer to wholesaler to distributor to retailer to consumer, right? This was basically the DTC movement in retail, where you saw it go from manufacturer to an advertising website to a consumer, right? And today you're going to have something similar, where now in retail, that manufacturer was in China, right? Most, or at least a large part of this manufacturing came from one or two places in Asia. It would get manufactured somewhere else, rebranded, and sold to consumers around the world. Now you can't do that with food because you can't make your chicken vindaloo in Shenzhen, China, right? And then ship it to New York City. So the way this is got the only difference here is the manufacturer will be hyper local. So you're putting a little mini China in every neighborhood, in every city, in every country around the world, right? And that mini China is basically this highly functional, sophisticated uh, cloud kitchen infrastructure, right? That's what these startups are building. So what does that lead to, right? That leads to having, this is Grab in Singapore, by the way, which allows you to order food as well as groceries in the same app in the same order, right? Why? Well, because they're able to store these groceries in this cloud kitchen facility, so they're able to, cater to multiple SKUs within the same facility. So that's the back end of the hardware. This is the front end of the software. And life is just going to get easier and easier, right? Um, as we start to integrate that back end. You can even order, you can order cross cuisine stuff. Like you can order Indian, and somebody else in your family can order some Chinese food, and then somebody else can order some toothpaste, and they will all come from the same physical infrastructure. All right. What does that lead to? Well, you can do some crazy stuff with food. This is what I'm most excited about, right? Which is you can. There's going to be. This is an example. This is a sushi brand based out of LA. It's actually a brand that Cloud Kitchens, the sister company of Cloud Kitchens, has built, called Future Foods, right? So it's a sushi brand. You can see it's delightfully meant for the digital age, right? And this is just the beginning of the types of brands you can build on the internet, right? We saw this happen to retail. Casper was just for mattresses. Warby Parker was just for glasses. Similarly, this is just for sushi, right? And so you can have these super specific niche brands, and then you can expand them to an entire country at the push of a button, right? Well, this was previously not possible. Like, think about it. Wendy's announced yesterday that they're going to expand to India like that, right? By just partnering with Rebel Kitchens and their cloud kitchens. So tomorrow, you can expand a single city restaurant that becomes successful to the entire country in 3 months. That's a massive leverage for local restaurants, right? Um, anyway, this is the other creative I thought was really cool from Tiger King. Okay, all right. So where do I think the opportunities are for people building, right? I think they're in three broad categories. It's new brands, new dishes, and new ingredients. New brands is there's going to be a whole host of new brands built. This is an example of an influencer in Singapore who started her own or who tested her own kitchen food brand concept, right? And all she did was plug in to it's almost like a merchandise store if you think about it, right? All she did was plug in to a cloud kitchen facility and picked a bunch of dishes that she wanted to make a menu out of that was across restaurants. So in each cloud kitchen facility, you have, let's say, 25 to 30 restaurants, right? At least in the one here, the startup called Smart City Kitchens here has these facilities that have between 25 and 30 kitchens. Okay. So she was able to connect into one facility and launch her own food brand, right? This is like how influencers launch their own merchandise brand, like their own T-shirt brand. They're not manufacturing the T-shirt; somebody else is, but they're endorsing it after it meets a certain quality check, right? So we're going to see a whole flurry of new types of food brands come along. So if you can build something to help people build new brands, that's invaluable to this community, right? So you build something for influencers and digital marketers. Again, when in doubt, look at retail, right? Same thing has happened in retail. Um, then there's a flurry of new dishes, which is chefs will now be able to leverage. Let's say they come up with a new dish that's proprietary in the way it's prepared and in its recipe, right? You can now, I mean, that's the next stage of evolution where a new brand uh, builds a moat around itself by also adding new dishes, which you won't get anywhere else, right? Once the brand feel goes away, like that sushi brand is super interesting, and you'll want to order from it the first time. But then when all brands start to look alike after the DTC wave takes off, you've got to get another moat, which is new dishes, right? So if you can help chefs who build these new proprietary dishes distribute them to restaurants, right? If you can build tools that helps them surface them to restaurants who are doing delivery only, then chefs can start licensing out, like almost like music royalty, right? Every time a dish is sold that they invented in a restaurant around the world, they get a piece of the pie, right? So helping chefs leverage their skills to get their product out to the world, I'm sure there's a bunch of interesting opportunities there on the tech side. And finally, it's new ingredients, right? This is all the stuff that you'd have heard about, which is plant-based meat, lab-grown meat. This is actually a picture from a startup in Singapore where they make lab-grown shrimp, right? So this is not purely a software hackathon type business. I still thought it was interesting to point it out because some of these are hard problems that are worth solving, and so I do think, like for instance, Beyond Meat is an $8 billion market cap business, right? So some of these are going to be huge, and so any tools to help either these companies that are doing building these new ingredients to distribute them to restaurants or to people who make food in these cloud kitchens will probably be invaluable. All right, so that kind of concludes my three big buckets of ideas for what you could build around. And as I said always, when in doubt, just look at the history of retail. I think the same thing is about to repeat with food. And thank you very much.
So we'll be opening up to Q&A now, right? And
Yeah.
there's a Q&A tab for anybody who's watching and has any questions about anything. Even more, I'm pretty sure Akshay will be happy to have his brain picked about any of these topics. So feel free to put your questions there. Um, so like one question I had, which I could like start off with, was that in the like how does the logistics of a food kitchen on the delivery end work? So like across countries, the problem I think a lot of them are seeing is that delivery as a business, as one centralized business like Amazon, is not making sense for too many people, and they're finding other ways to
Hmm.
make money. And just the unit economics of deliveries, like purely delivery, is not great. So when
Hmm.
there's proliferation of kitchens, how do you sort of fit in the delivery layer there, or is it a decentralized layer run by everybody on their own?
Yeah, so look, I think about this a lot, and I actually wrote a little piece about this on my blog. I think there's an opportunity to build the Shopify for restaurants, right? Which is any service that a restaurant, like as a restaurateur, right? Actually, the atomized version of a restaurant is a chef, right? So actually, a restaurant was a management layer over a chef because a chef could not start their own business, right? Because they don't know how to run a business and run operations and all this stuff, and they didn't want to. Today, a chef should be able to just make good food, and then a suite of products, both physical and digital, should help them deliver their food to the customer. That's a cloud kitchen operation. That's an independent food delivery app. That's a management software for their employees. All the stuff that you need to run a business, right? So I think that something similar happens to delivery as well, where these centralized delivery players will probably get face some competition from those who offer delivery as a service without plugging into the consumer. Today, delivery is like a delivery apps. Incentives are misaligned, right? Like they want to give the consumer the lowest cost, so they squeeze the merchants, similar to how Amazon does, right? So tomorrow, when the delivery app is not consumer facing, they're simply a business to business solution. They don't have that mal incentive. I think that gets solved a little bit with some competition from that.
So we have a question from Pratik.
Yeah.
So suppose someone opens an international cloud kitchen,
Yeah.
how will they ensure quality and taste of the recipe? Like how does that sort of element work?
I don't know, right? That is the entrepreneurial opportunity here. Like I'm sure. Well, if you look at Wendy's or McDonald's or whatever, um, some of their signature items taste exactly the same everywhere in the world, and some of their dishes are localized for the market they're in, right? And so, but in India, every McChicken burger will taste the same. There's a standardization. So there's a lot of good things to be learned from large chains on how to standardize that. And I think that will be a learning process for everybody who does that.
And so you previously just talked about a suite of products around chef, which replaces basically the management layer in order to for him to be able to create a restaurant on their own. So
Yeah.
currently, how does this ecosystem look? Like if I wanted to start a restaurant, does the ecosystem exist in this product software sense, which enables me to start a restaurant, or what are are there opportunities still there?
Yeah. So, I mean, you have a cloud kitchen startup. There are tons of them, right? You have restaurant software startups that basically allow you to integrate all of your software needs, whether it's plugging into multiple delivery players at the same time, or uh, or getting them getting photography services for them, or getting accounting software for to manage your employees. So a lot of this infrastructure already exists. So really, entrepreneurial chefs just need to come up with the money to open their first restaurant. The tools exist. Maybe they're rough around the edges, some of them, but it's really a matter of time, and by that I mean months, not years, before they have a full suite of Shopify-like products.
So what are the good tools in this ecosystem that we should watch out for? If you just want to get inspired, where do we look?
Okay, I would look at platforms that are building the Shopify of food, right? There are several of them around the world, right? So I would basically start there. To name some of them, Otter, Otter, which is again, it's a that's a sister company of Cloud Kitchens, which is the startup based out of LA in the US. And then there's Ordermark, and then there's a company called Toast. These are all in the US, but they're interesting kind of um, glimpses of what one can build for standalone restaurants to leverage delivery.
I just dropped that down. So if anybody wants to check them out, just feel free to look them up. We have one more question, and you've also written about something about this very recently. So how do you combat the Zomato and Swiggy from hijacking a standalone business that's doing very well with their own cloud kitchen and their own brands, just like what Amazon did with people who are selling well on their own platform?
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's where you have to pick a player that doesn't face the consumer, right? So Shopify is not a consumer facing product, right? So there's this quote, right? Show me the incentives and I'll show you the future, and or I'll show you the outcome. And so you want to pick a player where uh, that is um, that is incentivized to make you succeed without it coming at the cost of some other side of the marketplace, right? So to me, that is the most interesting way to pick this person, where you're their only customer.
Okay, so can you also talk about that Zomato Amazon continuum that you've mentioned before? Like how does that entire ecosystem look if one end is the centralized Amazon and the other is the Shopify? So how do you compare them?
Yeah, so it's exactly the same as retail, right? Like when in doubt, look at retail. Like you have Amazon where all the merchants go on there, but they don't really make a lot. They don't make big margins, right? On Amazon, they're usually there for visibility and distribution. They don't make large margins. They make margins when you go on their website and shop there, right? And that's exactly what's going to happen with food. When you're on Zomato and Swiggy, you're there for visibility, and so people find out about you. But I think the real money will come when they have their own app, or um, you know a lot of these restaurants are building their own app now. That's interesting. Maybe if you order from there, a lot of the times that's interesting, but I don't think it aggregates well. So I thought a lot about how it aggregates. Maybe eventually it aggregates at the neighborhood level, right? So you compete with Zomato, which has the same app across the world or across the country, with a neighborhood specific app which is chosen by people who are who know their food in the neighborhood. It's curated, right? um, And I think that's what ends up being some version of that, right? Where you have niche meeting the centralized, just it's like a directory.
So we have one more question from Sandeep, who's an independent
That could be
consultant.
an interesting app to build as well, by the way, right? Where a neighborhood food delivery app. And you don't need to build the delivery infrastructure. The delivery infrastructure is available as a service. All you need to do is build a front end that surfaces restaurants in a different, interesting way to the consumer,
And also helps
right?
them curate what the best pick of this localized
Correct.
preferences.
Where your friends picks are shown and where some influencers picks are shown. It's just a different interface to choose your restaurant. And I think that's what ends up competing, right? With something like Zomato.
So there's one more question from Sandeep, who's also independent consultant. So is the future of cloud kitchen having your own delivery fleet? Is that something you think is going to happen?
Who will have their own delivery fleet? The restaurant?
I'm assuming, um, yeah, that's what I'm assuming. That the person who's on the cloud kitchen, who's using the cloud kitchen, will also have a plugged-in delivery fleet owned by themselves.
Got it. Okay. So I don't think it makes sense for an individual restaurant to have their own delivery fleet, because it's just the economics don't work out. But I do think that there will be B2B delivery companies, right, that will service cloud kitchens and micro retail or high frequency retail, like dark stores, what are called dark stores, which is basically your grocery store without the storefront, right? So you order an app, you order your groceries on an app, and you get that delivered, right? Um, so to cater to that kind of um, consumer demand, or that category of consumer demand, which is packaged goods, packaged foods, essentially, and groceries, supermarket, and food, you might end up having a delivery network just for that. I believe that will happen. In fact, in the US, Postmates has an API to access the delivery network, right? Just in India, Zomato may not have it because it's very competitive and stuff like this. But like, I think what's the startup in Bangalore that does that's Google funded, that does hyperlocal delivery? Uh,
Does it?
Dunzo, right? I think Dunzo has an API as well, right? So I think these kind of companies end up winning in this environment.
Hmm. So interesting. Yeah. Anybody else? If you have any questions, feel free to keep them coming. We're here for a. You have a hard stop, I believe, at 5 o'clock.
Yeah, but we don't have to stay the entire course.
Yeah. So we have one more question here. It's sort of off topic. It's from Casey, who's a software engineer in India. What about the environmental impact of implementing all of this? We're already having trouble dealing with all the thrown away food packaging.
Yeah, I mean, look, okay, the food is getting prepared, the three meals being had in a day, right? Um, the question is, where are they being prepared, and what is the impact of that? A lot of the cooked meals potentially are getting, replaced by delivery or delivery only meals. Um, and that just means that there is an additional cost there, right? Which is that of having someone go bring your food, right? There's a carbon footprint that comes with that, as well as packaging. So I think the way to do that would be to a lot of these companies are already doing it, by the way, right? At least in Singapore here, or if I order food from Grab Food, it comes in a paper bag, right? I think there's sustainable ways of doing packaging. It's actually a really cool question, because that is one of the biggest problems and policy blowbacks that a lot of these companies face. So if you want to start a company, a no-brainer company would be to provide robust but environmentally friendly packaging for food delivery.
So you can just plug that into every sort of innovation happening.
Exactly. It's one of those things that sells itself, right? You don't even need a sales team.
Hmm. So what I like what I'm gathering from all of this is that the opportunities lie in or like mainly on two ends. One is something that enables chefs to become restaurants, like one-person restaurants in themselves, and the other is sort of this restaurant enterprise resource planning sort of way in which they can manage all these different aspects using software as easily as possible.
Yeah. My kind of like meme on this is, chefs will become restaurants, restaurants will become chains, and I mean, chefs will start restaurants, restaurants will start chains, and chains will start complaining, right? because they're about to, all these chains like McDonald's and Wendy's or whatever will face competition from really popular local restaurants that are able to leverage themselves up and launch nationally without a lot of upfront cost. A lot
So
of weird things may happen as a consequence of that. Your local restaurant might get VC funding, right? I wouldn't rule that out.
yeah, especially when you have all these influencer like marketing stuff plugged into this network, so you can just leverage it even if you're not selling food to a lot of people. Like
Yeah, that's right.
once you make a celebrity out of a chef, right now it operates only on a high status basis. But maybe there are
Yeah,
better ways to for them to earn money also.
yeah, exactly.
It's pretty interesting. Any concluding notes from you, Akash, Akshay?
No, I that's kind of most of what I had to say. I want to ensure that we talked about one idea with some depth, and hopefully that was useful to folks thinking about building something in food or just thinking about way um, how to participate in this broader theme of marrying bits and atoms, right? Because if you can tap into that, where you're building software that controls hardware, I think that's a more interesting, less competitive landscape for innovating.
So if you also further want to follow this spectrum of bits and items and retail and food,
Yeah,
where do we look? Where can we read more about this?
yeah. This is an opportunity for me to plug my blog. I write something called Superfood. Um, I don't write. I mean, I write it. I'm not a Substacker, which means I don't do this full time. I just whenever I find time, I try and publish something. Um, but that's where you can go find. It's superfood.substack.com, and you can find some stuff I've written in the past.
Sounds good. Everybody, let's charge Akshay with some blue Deathfolio specific hearts. It's one of the things that we have
Oh
to do and
wow!
it's actually online.
I wish people could speak on this. Is there a way to do that?
Yeah, so you can just raise anybody can raise their hands and we can pull them up on stage.
Wow, wow. Okay, this is very permission. Okay. All right. Um, well, thank you very much for listening to me. I hope that was interesting. I hope that was useful.
Yeah, and where do people like if people want to get in touch with you about any of these things? What can they
Twitter,
do?
I'm on Twitter at Akshay BD, AKSHAYBD.
Okay,
So you
we'll
should be.
drop that in our Discord as well. Thanks, Akshay, for being here. Being here. It was
Thank you
a
so
pleasure.
much. Have a nice evening, folks.